And good afternoon from Bristol, where just over an hour ago, the cricketer Ben Stokes was found not guilty of affray. He's now coming out of the court to make a statement on the steps. Not guilty, cleared of the charge. Let's listen and hear what he says.
Firstly, Ben would like to thank his friends, teammates, family, and in particular his wife Claire for their unerring support throughout what has been a very difficult period for Ben. Today's verdict represents the end of an 11-month ordeal for Ben, during which time he's had to maintain his silence at times when many on social media and in certain parts of the press predetermined his guilt long before the trial began. Over the last week, the jury have been able to see and hear all of the evidence, and not merely what the media have chosen to report. The evidence available to the jury included the full range of CCTV footage that shows exactly what happened in September. The jury's decision that Ben is not guilty fairly reflects the truth of what happened in Bristol that night. On 25th September, Ben had been out with teammates celebrating an England win. Contrary to some reports, there was no curfew in place. Ben was minding his own business when he came across two men being subjected to what Ben identified as serious homophobic abuse. It was only when others came under threat that Ben became physically engaged with the men in question. The steps that he took were solely aimed at ensuring the safety of himself or the others present. In addition to the extreme stress placed on Ben and his family by the trial, his intervention that night has already cost Ben the England vice-captaincy, his place on an Ashes tour, and his place in a number of other England matches. The past 11 months have served to highlight to Ben just how highly he values his position as an England representative, both in terms of the privilege that role entails and the responsibilities that accompany it. Now that the trial is over, Ben is keen to get back to cricket being his sole focus. Thank you.
Would you act the same way again, Mr. Stokes? Why did you shake the hand of Mr. Allen again, Mr. Stokes? Shake the hand.
Well, Ben Stokes there now leaving Bristol Crown Court, being pursued by a number of the reporters there after giving that statement on the steps, saying that the jury have heard the full range of evidence. They saw the full range of CCTV footage, and they said that this, they think, fairly reflects the truth of what happened that night, that he was minding his own business, encountered a couple of men who were suffering from homophobic abuse, and it was only when threatened that he got involved. And reflecting on what he has lost so far, talked about how it's lost him his place in the test, how it's cost him the England vice-captaincy, and it has taught him over the last 11 months, although he didn't use the word teach, but how much he values his important role within the England team. And one would imagine that those words have been chosen very carefully, because what happens now is the disciplinary proceedings by England's cricket board, who will now look at the result of this court case, and they will be looking at the same CCTV footage and making their decision about what kind of disciplinary action both he and Ryan Hales, who was out with him that night, should face. Let's bring in Rebecca Williams, who's been covering this case for the last week. He looked a little shell-shocked, didn't he? His wife by his side, we know that she was crying in court. This has been an ordeal for him, but his legal team, it seems almost trying to paint this picture that he's been besmirched by the media, but this is a man himself who admitted to the court here that he threw quite a few punches that night.
Yes, we witnessed it ourselves looking at that CCTV. You saw him throw at least 6 punches. We heard that in court. But Ben Stokes said he was acting in self-defence. You saw him there, as you say, pretty shell-shocked with his wife. There's been a huge amount of media interest in this case. And even though he has been found not guilty, there will now be this independent investigation by the England and Wales Cricket Board as to what happens next. He could still face a ban. You remember when it all unfolded back in September, that meant he missed out on the Ashes. He was then able to play in New Zealand, and then obviously while this court case has been going on, he missed out on the second test at Lord's against India. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster year for him. But throughout this court case, there were allegations that night he had been homophobic and he had mocked a couple of gay men. Now, he says he was standing up for them. So there's been a lot of, changing arguments here, but crucially, Ben Stokes, throughout this case, has said he was acting in self-defence. But of course, there is an awful lot of CCTV. There was footage filmed by the public as well, and that footage shows this incident unfolding that night, and Ben Stokes threw a number of punches.
And a number of questions too for the CPS as to why they brought this case, why they decided on the affray charges and not ABH, and why they felt they had such a good case if after a weeks-long trial it took just 3 hours for the jury to find both defendants not guilty.
Yeah, at the beginning of this case, the CPS tried to put further charges on the defendants, but the judge said that that wasn't possible. I want to read you a quote now that the CPS have released, and they say, the CPS keeps cases under constant review. We selected the charge of affray at the outset in accordance with the Code for Crown Prosecutors, and they go on to say, upon further review, we considered that additional assault charges would also be appropriate. The judge decided not to permit us to add these further charges. The original charge of affray adequately reflected the criminality of the case, and we proceeded on that. So that's the CPS's point of view. But of course, a lot of people are asking, well, how did this come about in the first place, that these additional charges weren't placed on the defendants? And we should point out as well, Ryan Ali, who we saw leave the court earlier, he admitted in court he'd used a bottle in self-defence that night. He's also been acquitted, not guilty.
Rebecca, thanks very much for that. Well, Ben Stokes now has left the building. Will be going away for a bit of quiet time. He's certainly not playing this weekend, and will be waiting for the ECB's decision. His future is in their hands. That's all for now from Bristol. Let's hand you back to Kay in London.